I know there are a lot of you out there who enjoy your weekends playing in the mud, in the sand, or out in the open sea with your boat. Or what about at the lake, skiing with your friends, listening to the jams through the large speakers in the back of the boat, having a good time, right? Likely you need an amplifier to provide amplification for your speakers, and there's some out there, including this Kenwood, which are waterproof. Yes, can be submersible under the water. We have shown this. Check a link in the video description. You can see that video. But there are companies like Sundown and their SDX series, which offer water-resistant amplifiers. These are not waterproof, but you can use these on ATVs, side-by-sides, boats, etc., because they have a protective coating on the amplifier board. The SDX series has been out for a few years at the time of this video, but we just recently picked one up due to the incredible sale price on this one. We picked up the SDX-1200, which is the largest monoblock. In total, there are 3 monoblocks and 4 multi-channel in this series. Let's take a look at the owner's manual to find out the ratings for the SDX-1200.1. You can see at 4 ohms, 450 watts, 2 ohms, 825 watts, and 1 ohm, 1200 watts. These are all at 14.4 volts. Also requires a 120 amp fuse. Next up in the box is the remote base cable as well as the remote base knob. First up, the remote base cable here. Uses the RJ11 style connector, like an old telephone like your grandma used to use. And then we have the base knob. Here it is. It just has an LED that shows you that it's on, and it has a potentiometer. And I must say, this potentiometer is very small with my big hands, hard to turn. So I had my daughter try it, and even with her small hands, it was very difficult to turn. We also have some mounting screws as well as 3 what-the-hex wrenches. Now, why do we need 3? Well, we'll find that out here shortly. Next up in the box, of course, is the main attraction, the SDX-1200.1 amplifier. Let's get it out of the plastic so we can show you what it looks like. Looks really nice. I like the design here. The heatsink, it is all aluminum except for the bottom plate. And we do have some plastic plugs here, which we'll show closer in a minute. But yeah, I really like the look of this. It's definitely different than most amplifiers. Here on the left, you'll see the power and protect LED. You'll see the power input as well as a remote switching input. And then a little bit further down in the middle of the amp, you see the remote connection there for the bass knob that's really hard to turn. Then we have another plug for the speaker output. We have 2 speaker outputs, as well as Tiffany-style RCA inputs and outputs, which is much appreciated. As I mentioned earlier, this amplifier is water-resistant, designed for marine applications. And here you can see the power terminal as well as the speaker terminal. Let's take a closer look at the power terminal first. It does have 4 gauge for power and ground inputs, and approximately 12 gauge there for the remote turn-on. And you can go ahead and hook this up before you plug in your amplifier. It makes it easy to get everything wired up while it's detached. Here is a 12 gauge speaker outputs. This is a monoblock amp, but having a couple outputs is always nice. That way if you're running multiple speakers or a dual voice coil subwoofer, it's easier to hook it up. Now if you're not paying close attention, you may miss the little top panel here, which hides some additional settings. There are 2 Allen head screws here, which we'll remove with one of the 3 different hex wrenches that are provided. That gives us access to the bass boost, the low pass filter, the subsonic, the phase adjustment, as well as the input level adjustment. This amp accepts up to 6 volts RMS. Now the thing to be real careful with all amps is to make sure you check your settings before you hook it up. In this case, everything was turned to the right. So we got to reset everything here to get it ready to test. Now again, we're going back to the 3 different hex wrenches. Why in the hex do we have 3 of them? Well, there are 3 different Allen screw sizes for the power inputs, for the speaker terminals, as well as for the little top plate. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. You also have to be careful if you use wire ferrules on the end of your wiring. Make sure that these are connected well, because I noticed that these type of connectors tried to push your wires out instead of holding them down tight. As far as dimensions for the 1200 watt amp, 12.2 inches on the long side, 7 inches for the width, and 2.1 inches for the height. Now for the fun part, we're going to hook the amplifier up to the amp dyno, find out the true output power. Here on the screen, you'll see on the left the power output in watts, in the middle the ohm load, on the right the voltage of the dyno. We'll also have the remote clamp so we can estimate efficiency.
Hold on to your butts.
First test we're going to try here is at 4 ohms. The amplifier is rated 450 watts. We'll be using the 40 hertz test signal. Certified test takes us up to 1% distortion. And there you go, 466 right at 14.42. So it does the rated power plus just a little bit more right at that exact voltage that they rated at. Let's try it uncertified up to the clipping point of the amplifier. And here you can see we get quite a bit more, 488 at 14.39. Next up, we'll reset the dyno here for the dynamic test, which sends a 40 Hertz pulse tone into the amp so that we can see how much dynamic power the amplifier has. And you can see 509 at 14.56 volts. Now let's reset the dyno here for 2 ohms, where it's rated 825 watts. Again, 40 Hertz test tone. Certified test first up to 1% distortion. And, oh boy, we're a little bit shy here. 764 at 14.28. Let's crank up that voltage though and find out what it does a little bit higher voltage, because we didn't quite get the 14.4. So we're going to actually go way above that. Here we go, certified. Let's run it again. 14.67 volts. We're still a little bit shy, 818. It is statistically insignificant, if I could talk, but still didn't quite meet rated power. But of course, at the uncertified test here, with a little bit under 14.2 volts, we still get 822. So we're right at it. It is so close that, I mean, you got to give it a pass, but still, it's a little bit shocking that the Sundown amp doesn't do quite a bit more than it's rated they typically do. Here dynamically, we're getting right at 900 watts, 899 at 14.46, and it jumped to 909 right there at the end. All right, now let's try 1 ohm where it's rated 1200 watts. Here we go, certified test first, a 1% distortion, and 1127, but our voltage is a little bit low there at 14.09. Remember, this amp is rated at 14.4, so let's crank it up so we can find out what it does at the higher voltage. Here we go, certified test again, 1% distortion, 1193 at 14.44. You cannot get any closer than that. So this is literally right at rated. Uncertified to clipping, of course, it beats the rated easily, 1283, 14.36. Then we send the dynamic tone, 40 Hertz, into the amplifier, and yes, it shows the dynamic capability here, jumps over 1500 watts. It's going to jump up again a little bit when these lithiums reset, 1583 at 14.42. And here are all the results of the SDX-1200.1. A little bit shocked at 2 ohms and 1 ohm certified. It came a little bit under, but again, it's so close that you got to give it a pass. So do you want to see the test under 1 ohm? Wait till the very end of the video. But what about lower voltage tests? Here I'm going to run a few tests at 4 ohms, 2 ohms, and 1 ohm with around 12 volts. Certified only. Here you can see 352 at 12.35 volts at 4 ohms. Next up, we'll reset the dyno here for 2 ohms. Again, running pretty much a 12 volt battery with just a slight charge on it. And we got 558 at 2 ohms right at 12 volts. What about the 1 ohm test? I think we're going to drop a little bit under the 12 volts, but here we go. And we get right at 800 watts, 809 at 11.76 volts. Next up, we're going to hook up this 1200 watt amp to a fat Savard subwoofer, and let's see how it flexes. Time to get out the tools and let's take this amplifier apart and see what it looks like on the inside. If you're still watching, please smash me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like this kind of content, because there's more coming all the time. Let's take the bottom panel off and see what it looks like on the inside. Here we go. Looks like quite a bit of the components here on the right side, weighing it down with the capacitors, with the transformer, with the choke, etc. And yes, Sundown audio right here on the board. This is the real deal. We have 25 volt, 3300 microfarad capacitors here for input filtering. In the bottom of the amp, there's an overhead shot, so you can see all the traces, see the design, and we have 2200 microfarad, 80 volts for the rails. They're 105 degrees Celsius, which is always appreciated. Those typically last longer. I'll let the technicians reply back about the brands of capacitors that are used here, whether they're good or not. Next up, we'll talk about the stuff companies love or hate, depending on what I say, but let's talk about the pros and cons. First up, the good stuff. Sundown quality and looks. Top notch here on this amp. Closeout price can be good if you can find it. I'll leave a link in the video description. Water resistant. Yep, not waterproof, but water resistant. It also has dual speaker outputs, make it easier for hooking up dual voice coil subwoofers or multiple subs. Tiffany RCA's in and out. Variable subsonic filter, variable phase, and it is start-stop compatible. We will show the test here after the pros and cons. Speaking of cons, things to be aware of. It is water resistant, not waterproof. Make sure you don't get those mixed up. The remote bass knob really sucks. Hate the way it adjusts. Very difficult to turn. There's no clip indicator on the amp, on the bass knob, or on the amp itself. The power and speaker plugs are difficult to get the wires in. This is one case where you may not want to use the ferrules. You may just want to use the bare wires because it works better that way. There are 3 different hex keys, which we've already talked about. Pain in the butt. And ratings versus measure. We're used to Sundown amps performing well better than their ratings, but in this case, they performed right at the rated power. I mentioned before I wanted to show the cutoff here of voltage of the amplifier. So we hooked it up to the power supply and we turned it down. We got right around 7.7 volts before the amp kind of shut off and gave the red light. Of course, it came right back out once we turned it up. Then we want to find out what the high end of the voltage is. And what we found out here is around 16.2 is when the amp goes into protect. So really nice voltage range, 7.7 volts up to 16.2. Helps out depending on your situation where you have a lower voltage or you have a little bit higher. This amp will work for you. I believe at the time of the video this amplifier is discontinued. Check links in the video description if you catch it in time. It's deep discounted down to $149 from $399. So if you grab one then, it's a good time. Till next time, this is Big D. I'm out of here. Those who stick around to the end know that we do some additional tests, and today we're going to do 0.8 ohms on this Sundown SDX-1200. Certified test first to 1% distortion, 1356 watts right at 14.4 volts. Let's reset the dyno here for the uncertified test up to clipping. See what we get. There you go. Look at that, 1480 watts at 14.23. Finally here, we will reset the dyno for the dynamic test. And check this out. We're pushing to, oh, we beat 2000. 2024. Nope, 2097. 14.74. We're not done yet. Let's try 0.67. See how it does here. Or does it go up in smoke? Please don't go up in smoke. And no, it doesn't go into smoke. But it puts out over 2300. Is it going to do any more? 2368, 14.57.